The conductor decided he would be a historical guide, so he kept on giving a talk over the loudspeaker on the train, discussing American history. And one thing he said, I sat up and was shocked. He said, you know, when George Washington came for as president and served 2 terms and deliberately retired as the seventh president, that was one of the great moments of history, by the way, that a president had willingly left office. He could have stayed on, he could have been a king for life, but he left office to set a precedent. And the conductor said, well, you know, when we started out in America, and he was actually a man from the Caribbean, so he was basically taking on America as his own. He said, we didn't have presidents for life. And I sat up and I said, well, that's an idea. No presidents for life. Now, what does that remind me of? The point is that Ugandans also are waking up to the absurdity of a man who thinks he should serve as their elected leader for 40 years. And the work we've done with the ICC gathers the evidence that shocks people into a consciousness that enough is enough. Now in 2026, I believe this gentleman here will be running for president. And the people of Uganda will again vote, and they do vote. And there is an election, and there are millions of people who vote. And nobody keeps people from the polling place. They may try to rip up the ballots afterwards, or they may add several 100,000 ballots to the box. We have nice films showing that. But ultimately, the power of a dictator to maintain forcible rule through election does depend on people voting. You can only fake so many votes. You can't fake 5 million votes. You might fake 200, 300, 400,000 and alter the balance. But because of what we've done and the evidence we've manifested, I believe very deeply that the people of Uganda in 2026 will collectively begin to say to themselves, this is enough. You know, we heard that man on the train and say there are no presidents for life. It came across the Atlantic right to Africa, and they said, we know we don't have to have presidents for life. And I think the evidence we've manifested and the proof of what has been happening is going to shock people in Uganda into changing how they vote. Now, most voted for Bobby Wine, obviously. But enough were conservative and loyal to the original Museveni, who came out as a liberal, that they did vote for him. Some did. But that's going to change in 2026, because dictatorships fail when the psychology of the people changes. That's the fundamental point of dictatorship. When the psyche of the voter, of the citizen shifts, the dictator loses authority. Now, after we released our complaint, and the New York Times ran a story, Bobby took a tour. Was it Eastern Uganda, Bobby? I think it was. And number one, he was on the radio. Usually the regime blocks the radio station. Bobby can't even get a hotel room because they threaten all the hotel managers. At this time, they didn't. The New York Times headlines spoke around the world. And some people may wonder, why did we wait? Why didn't we hold the press conference? The New York Times very carefully approached it for about 4 weeks. And finally, we decided that we will let them have the story. And the headline they issued has the effect almost of a statement, almost of U.S. policy. That headline was very significant. From that moment on, Museveni and his regime could no longer actively interfere with Bobby's actions. And not only did Bobby have unlimited use of the radio, but he traveled and a group of 100,000 people were with him. That's right. Imagine that, 100,000 people. And they were left totally unimpeded by the government. Yeah. The government can no longer arbitrarily arrest and abuse people, at least in public. 3 months ago, they would have broken up that group and not let it gather. 3 months ago, Bobby would not have got anyone near a radio. But that changed. And that's the power of law when the evidence is publicized around the world. And undoubtedly, this pattern can continue. Now imagine a group of 100,000 people protesting, standing with Bobby, standing at a rally, and the police or the army begin to shoot. Imagine how that will look to the world. Does anyone think Mustafa now will dare to take that chance? That will create the indictment. That will yield the immediate indictment by the ICC. You have no choice. And so we have already shifted the psychological dynamic in Uganda. And remember, all dictatorship is psychological in the end. And dictatorship ends when the people change, and when the dictator knows that he can no longer continue with business as usual. Now, if you remember Romania, there was a communist leader by the name of Ceausescu. Now, Ceausescu ran a pretty vicious Stalinist regime. And all of a sudden, in 1989, he fled. Now, there are other forces building up in Poland and East Germany challenging the communist dictatorships. Ceausescu gave a speech. And all of a sudden, instead of having a pacing crowd cowering to what he said, people started booing. Yes. Do you remember this? And Ceausescu had never heard a boo in his life.
Offer the raise.
That's right, yes. And so Ceausescu fled. That was the end of his regime. And he fled for one reason. He understood the psychology of the people had changed. And when that moment is met, the regime's power fails. So the next time there is a gathering of 100,000 or 200,000 or more, the regime has two choices. It can fire or round people up and abuse them and be seen in the entire world community as doing so. Or it can take the legally safe approach and allow the protest and gathering to continue. Either way, and this is the beauty of it, either way, its power is gone. If it shoots, its power is gone. It's a criminal regime. And if it can't shoot and is forced to allow the protest to continue, its psychological power is gone. And that is what happened. And that is what we saw with those 100,000 people who accompanied Bobby. This is the beginning of the turn. Now, it takes a long time for a large vessel to make a turn. An aircraft carrier will take a nice hour and a half just to turn around. A country is a bit of an aircraft carrier, but this is the beginning of the turn. The credibility of the regime is now challenged, damaged, and in fact destroyed by the evidence, not by the ICC complaint, but by the evidence we brought forward. And so it does not matter what, in the end, the ICC chooses to do. This is the message I would like to ask you to take away with you. What matters is the evidence that we've manifested and the change in the world's understanding of what has happened. When those 54 people, probably 100, were killed in November of that year, Museveni was able to get away with saying, well, there were officers who overreacted. But no one can get away with saying there were officers who overreacted when we read these 215 affidavits. We have 4 individuals who identify Lieutenant General Mahuzi, an absurd title if ever there was one, running and operating and commanding torture centers. 4 individuals who were abused brutally, and we have their affidavits. One of them was Frequenza, whom you know. The others are going to be confidential stuff. Who defined the abuse they experienced in detail, and then they each say they were called into a meeting at the torture center with Muhuzi. Muhuzi was in command of these centers. And we now have the evidence that demonstrates that. Muhuzi is identified as an individual operating a criminal enterprise. And that's an extraordinarily serious fact. So bear in mind what we've achieved is the delegitimization of this regime. And that is the fundamental achievement thus far. Now, this is not the end of it, obviously. We don't know what the ICC will do, but we know it must continue. Obviously, Bobby's work continues, without question. But Bobby can't be alone. We've given new protection to the people of Uganda through this process. But that protection must be used. Freedom doesn't come from the outside. No nation was ever freed from dictatorship by outsiders, by a court or by a government from abroad or by the UN or anyone else. Dictatorship and authoritarianism end only internally. Now, we're not stopping this process, but it can't just be this process. The people of Uganda must now take this newfound protection and use it. And one of the things I've learned in this work is that Ugandans culturally are very nice people. Generally very calm and generous and loving people. Now, that being said, it's a little hard, if that's the way you see the world, to stand in the street and protest. So we have to marry that wonderful culture to the need to speak out. Because remember, authoritarians benefit from the decency of the people of the country. Remember in America, there were almost no slave rebellions. You know that? As bad as slavery was in this country, there were almost no slave rebellions. And slaves often were the vast majority of the population. And were skilled, many knew how to use weapons, many knew how to use tools. They could have overcome their white masters in the South. They didn't. Because they were decent human beings who didn't want to kill the people they had grown up with. And that's how slavery maintained its power. Capitalizing on the inherent decency of its victims. And that's what dictators do. They know the average person does not believe in violence, and they can capitalize on it. Now, Dr. King showed us something, and Bobby does exactly the same thing, that the peaceful protest is powerful. So we have to take that decency in the Ugandan people and merge it to peaceful protest. We've given protection through the ICC, but now we need to take that a step further. People need to understand. They need to speak out in Uganda and join together en masse. There's a thought I had and I just lost it. I apologize. That's the essential message, that we've started the process. We have delegitimized this regime. We've delegitimized it in the world's understanding through this evidence and in the understanding of the people of Uganda. But that can't be all. The people of this nation must inherently bring that forward. Oh, I know what you say. Gandhi once wrote that the most violent and powerful form of protest he knows of in India was the hunger strike. And that's a strange thing to say. Because Indians by nature are so concerned about their neighbor, that when they see someone on a hunger strike, they become violently angry at the cause of a hunger strike. And so the decency and humanity of people can be made into something that lets us speak out. And that's the essential message I wanted to leave, that we take this forward. We went to the ICC. They may take this case. We brought our evidence. We legitimized this government. The Ugandan people are now seeing it differently. We've taken the power of oppression away from Museveni in many respects. Now we must use that. And so I would encourage people to speak out in Uganda and to engage in peaceful protest. Because there is now protection that comes from the rule of law. By the way, remember the Daily Monitor article that came out, I guess it was 2.5 weeks ago? 2 front-page stories derived from the ICC case. That was rather extraordinary. That's a demonstration of the new weakness of the regime and the strength of those who wish to speak out. The law has given us this power. So I want to thank you all for hearing me out today. I don't know if anyone has any questions. I'm certainly happy. I don't have time for that. But I'm certainly happy to answer a few questions. And I want to acknowledge Bobby Wine and what he has done. I mean, it's truly extraordinary that he has committed himself personally in this way. You know, there is danger in this work, and we've seen that happen. And I just want to acknowledge that, and the leadership of the NDP, David Lewis and others, I don't have everybody's name, and Barbara for her commitment. Because this movement requires people dedicated, and then they can lead. And so I want to acknowledge that. And thank you all for the opportunity to serve in this way. So if anyone has questions, I'm really happy to.
I used to work with the United Nations for a long time. Our problem with ICC was privately as staff members. It does not seem to have arrest power in any country. For example, a few years ago, I think Sudanese former President had an ICC arrest warrant for many years. It went on many other countries, not arrested. Specifically, he went to South Africa, I think African Union meeting or something. I personally too thought South African government at the time was credible. They would obey the ICC arrest warrant and facilitate ICC to arrest him. He came laughing until internally they organized themselves. My problem is, what if Museveni and his group decide to fly to Putin's place, Beijing, or South Africa? Shouldn't the ICC at least impound airspace when they know they're on the flight? Thank you.
Thank you for those comments. Unfortunately, they can't impound the airspace, but the ICC does have a power, and that is most governments will arrest on that warrant an ICC, a person who's been indicted by the ICC. Now, not every government, Putin and China, do not follow the rule of law. We can't expect that. But I can tell you this, Museveni and Muhuzi can no longer really travel freely. They might make it to Kenya. That's pretty much where their range of power ceases. They're afraid. Russia is a lawless country. It doesn't follow the rule of law. But you can't stop them, you can't pull the plane down. But really, there is a power of arrest. Most governments will arrest someone. So their power, their place to move is limited. If they show up in Spain or France or Germany or the US, they'll be arrested. And they'll be taken in handcuffs to the knee. So there is a real power. Nothing is perfect, but remember, the goal of what we're doing is to demonstrate the reality of what's happening. And even if the ICC doesn't act officially, by the way, I want to say one thing. There's a lot of talk now about whether the ICC focuses too much on African governments. You've all heard that. As if somehow it's racist to investigate African dictators who abuse human rights. This is a bogus argument. It is not racist to investigate African dictators. It is protecting the rights of African people to investigate those dictators. And the notion that somehow it's a racist act to focus on African governments is nonsense. This is designed to protect the rights of the people who live there. And so disabuse yourselves of that notion. Thank you. I don't know how much time we have, but any other questions, I'm happy to. I don't control the questioning.
Mr. President, the presenter, thank you for your elaborate presentation. My question is going to be short but direct. What will be the time frame to get a tangible result in terms of your legal experience? That's number one. Number two, Museveni as a corrupt leader, what can you as a person do to his proxies like the lobbyists who can influence those people making decisions in the ICU? Because some of us, we may have this, but sometimes we may be worried because Museveni has been in power for so long and is a corrupt guy who can underground influence the decision in that court. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm glad your question was direct but potent. Okay. And the question really is, doesn't Museveni have enough power to corrupt the process? That's really what you're asking, I think. Let me answer it this way, and I don't mean to sound disrespectful. I think you are being a little overawed by the perception of Museveni's power.
That's true. That's true.
It's very easy to assume the person in power can somehow pull strings around the world. Now, Uganda does have a delegate on the ICC, but it doesn't mean that the ICC is going to be swayed by that individual. And remember something, that individual knows there's a day of reckoning coming. And they may not be willing to sell out from Museveni. So don't assume the power of Museveni exists at all internationally. And don't assume that his minions will necessarily follow suit. They too are worth. That's the idea of this process. As far as the timeline goes, that's impossible to say. And in a real sense, it doesn't matter to us. As long as this investigation goes on and it hangs over the head of this government, there is power in that. So don't worry about how long it takes. I hope I've answered your questions.
If you don't mind, could you talk a little bit more, because I wanted to sink deep in the analogy you gave to Sheshko. Before you said that, I was scribbling a note to send to you. I wanted you to mention Sheshko, because this is a powerful dictator. He's addressing the people, and then somebody decides to do it. The first person to do it. And what did he do? He offered to double everybody's salary. But instead, that increased the movement. And that's an important point for Sister Mother Uganda. Safety then. So could you expand on that?
Yes, I'd be glad to. And I apologize, I have no idea what our time frame is, but I assume the controlling parties will tell me. So thank you. I saw you nodding vigorously when I mentioned Ceausescu, Bobby too, actually. It's an amazing chapter in history that this Stalinist dictator who had enormous power in Romania somehow understood he had to leave power because the crowd turned on him. It was simple speech, like he'd given hundreds and hundreds of times before, and all of a sudden the crowd turned on him. So he offers to raise salaries, and it gets worse. And this is why, with respect to the gentleman who raised the question about corruption of Museveni, ultimately, corruption won't work. Offer more money. But once the people have gotten to a point of moral anger, and understand that what has happened transgresses rules of decency, you can bribe them all you want, it's not going to change anything. Ceausescu attempted that in that talk, clumsily, and got worse for him. Museveni, by the way, every single person who has been arrested and kept in detention in Uganda, including Bobby, actually, has been offered a bribe. They've been offered the opportunity. Bobby was offered bribes indirectly. I think people were told, we tell Bobby Wine we have something for him. We have a job in government for him. Other people were given legal jobs. They were offered law jobs. People were offered money. And I believe Stephanie mentioned he would have given them the money. But they did not accept it. And in fact, it makes it worse. And so by trying to bribe the people, once people have reached a point of moral outrage, the problem gets worse for the regime. So I firmly believe that Stuart Temple, I think I lost this, is important to understand that once that psychology changes, the regime can't go back again. And I think we're at that point now, and we need to enhance that process. Yeah. Yes, is there any other question?
So many. They don't
Okay, let me take this chance to thank the presenter. Thank you so much, Mr. Bruce, for giving us light regarding ICC. My name is Isaac Atomsage from Itiana. My major concern with ICC is regarding the way you are implementing your policy. I wanted to know that does it require someone from moving from the government, then can people to the court to ICC? Because we have seen so many cases being committed by the current government. But we see the ICC is closing your hands. You don't react. Is it in your policy that someone has us being moved to the power, then you can be taken to the court? And we also need to thank you so much that you said that.
Most of the time, I could interrupt. I apologize, but you're going too fast. I couldn't quite follow you.
Sorry, let me be slow. I said that is it under the ICC policy to take the people who have committed crime within their time in the government after they have been removed, or they can be questioned before they've been removed? Because we have seen it in Uganda. The government is over near them, and they are concerned and his family. They have committed enough cases to be answered in the ICC court. What are you waiting for? Then another question, another interest, I also want to comment that. You say that most of the dictators cannot be removed by external forces, which is quite good. And I really agree with you. The question is, what have you done to support those suffering people down there in their government, under their government dictatorship rules? Because the people try to react, they have gone to the streets, but we see that the ICC is closing their door. What are you waiting for that case to help these vulnerable Ugandan or Africans who are suffering down there?
I think you're saying, why is the ICC waiting? Is that the basic
This guy doesn't work for ICC.
Which is the legal person. So who understands all the procedures.
Yes, but that is what he has done. He has, remember, he has just joined us. So when he came on board, we started the case. We've been working with him. So what he's doing is to put all
to the gentleman who asked the question. First of all, if your question was suggesting that I am part of the ICC in some way, that's not correct. So I was puzzled when I said, what are you doing? When you said, what are you doing? And I didn't quite get that. I am not with the ICC. I'm simply a lawyer. And on behalf of Bobby and Amos Katumba and others, I have filed papers with the ICC as a lawyer representing a group of people, and in this case, 215 victims. So to begin with, I'm not part of them. We have asked their prosecutor, who is a lawyer working for the ICC, to launch their own investigation. That's the first step. And so what we do is we ask them, we say to them, we have the evidence that justifies the inquiry. We want you to launch your investigation. We're asking them to do that, and they're an independent force. No one can tell them what to do, and they'll act as they see fit. Now, obviously, everybody in some way is political. Does the ICC respond to political forces? Probably not, but they might respond to criticism that we look too much at Africa. We can't stop that negativity if it happens. However, we have given them the evidence to work with. The second point is, they do not only go after a person once they're out of power. Putin's not out of power. They indicted Putin, for example. They indicted Milosevic, who was in power in Serbia. And so the ICC's power is not used only to those who have been forced out. They use their authority to those who are in power. And that's very important. If a sitting president or a general or a speaker of the House is indicted by the ICC, they lose all international legitimacy, except perhaps in China or Russia. South Africa, maybe. That's a bit of a hybrid problem. Yeah, well, Putin's never leaving Russia, I can tell you that. So they don't go only after those who are out of power, they go after those who are in power. I think that addressed your questions. I'm not sure if there's another aspect to it.
All right. Now we have one more question here. The last one for you.
Thank you very much for the insightful presentation. My fears, not so different from those aired out by one of my colleagues, except that mine are not born out of the perception of Museveni's power, but the weaknesses in the international system of which the ICC is part. That the examples that you have pointed out of people that have been held accountable may be out of coincidence, but have only taken place when there has been policy shift in the Western capitals. And why I'm asking is the supplementary role that for us who are not in the courts, but are citizens of Uganda, friends of Uganda, the role that we need to play to supplement the efforts of those that are pushing the case in court. Because many cases, and this has been part of the debate about the effectiveness of the ICC, is that many times the dictators, the violators of human rights, who enjoy the protection of powerful governments in the global system are not held accountable. And the one we are dealing with is one of such people because of the role he plays in the region for some of those powerful governments. So what roles can we play to supplement your efforts to make sure that the efforts that you are putting in are not frustrated by the interference of the powerful governments of the world whose interest is house?
Thank you for that very thorough question. It really does get to the core of the problem. Now, obviously, the US and Britain, primarily, are responsible for maintaining Museveni in power. There's no question about that. Israel, to a degree, allows security equipment, surveillance equipment to be sold to Uganda's government as well. Mostly, it is the US and Britain who maintain this regime, both militarily and through money. About $1 billion a year goes to the government, and that helps prop up the government. Now, as Dr. Jingle said before, we don't really need the outside money, do we? It's used as a means of perpetuating those in power that outsiders favor. And that's the problem with foreign aid, and African governments and societies have fallen victim to it. Aid is a weapon used by the West primarily Our aid is used for political purposes. Now, all of that being said, the U.S. is not an evil regime. It's not going to send troops in to keep Museveni in power. It sponsors him because of a somewhat racial attitude in the U.S. State Department that African governments, African societies need a strong man to rule. Let's face it, there is this attitude prevailing in the West, primarily in the U.S. and Britain, that Africans need a strong man. Never a strong woman, by the way, a strong man. And this is fundamentally a racial conception of how the West sees power in Africa. It's wrong. We've seen many, many examples of democracy in Africa. And it's fundamentally biased and ignorant. It is a racial point of view the U.S. practices. But the U.S. ultimately is not going to use force to keep Museveni or any other ally like that in power. If a democratic election clearly demonstrates he's lost authority, the U.S. will not stand in the way. I don't speak for the U.S., I'm just analyzing U.S. policy. Don't mistake that, I'm not part of the U.S. government. But ultimately, what role should the Ugandan people play is the question. Now you put the question as what role supplementary to the process can you play? Well, there's, I think, the error, if you don't mind me saying so. Your role in Uganda as Ugandans is not supplementary. Your role is primary. Bobby's role is primary. My role is supplementary. All right, that's what we have to change. We have to change this quiescent obeisance and the notion that somehow outsiders have the primary duty to make this change. I'm a catalyst, but a catalyst makes a reaction. That reaction must be Ugandan. So what role can Ugandans play? Not as supplements, but as citizens who are demanding their rights. Once we change that mental perspective, we change everything. That's the whole point of Bobby's campaign and the NU Peace campaign. What role can we play? Well, there's a multiplicity of roles. First of all, Uganda is broken down into a set of local governments. Every town and district has a chair. Is that correct? Those chairs are often independent people. They're not all national resistance movement toadies. Many of them are quite independent. Many of them, probably a majority, support the NUP. You can go to your chair. You can go to your district meetings and speak. You're not going to get arrested for speaking against torture and against the regime. Imagine if 5 million Ugandans went to district meetings all over the country on a given day and spoke about torture. Imagine the impact of that on the regime. That suddenly every district meeting, which the regime can't shut down, has people complaining about torture and abuse. That is one thing that can be done by Ugandans. That is a painless, simple thing, but immensely powerful. That's the first thing. To start to speak out again as citizens. Saying, I have the primary right to be heard. That's the first step. That is not a supplement, that is the primary move. And then the primary move is to organize another 100,000 person gathering. Not even if Bobby is there. Organize it in your own district. Organize a meeting, a public meeting. Hold public meetings in every district, in every city, in every town, in every county.
Yeah.
Talking about change.
True.
Have a public meeting to talk about changing the Constitution. To get rid of military jurisdiction, which is what is used for arrest people. Have a simple meeting like that. Every district can hold a meeting to discuss whether the Constitution should be amended to eliminate military jurisdiction over the citizens. No one's going to get arrested. That will have immense power. Do this over and over again and begin to organize public meetings and protests. Yes, on some occasions, the government might react with violence, but they can only do that once or twice and on a small scale. And that would be tragic, but people are killed anyway. Far better to begin to assert rights as citizens. I hope I've given some positive examples. There are a myriad of things that can be done. But the first step is to get over the notion that we are Uganda only a subsidiary of this effort. Ugandans are the primary effort. Remember the Arab Spring movements? Those were internal movements. Now, they weren't entirely successful. Some governments later became oppressive, but they were not led from the outside. They were led internally. And we have a movement, and it's a legitimized movement. I want to say one more thing, and then I'll close. Uganda was given a great benefit by Britain when Britain left. That benefit was the rule of law. Uganda has a court system. It has lawyers who are well trained. Most are committed to law. Some have become afraid and become tools of the government. But most have within them that core of belief in law. I've met Ugandan lawyers, and they're as competent and thoughtful and well-trained as American lawyers or British lawyers. Uganda was given this legal system. That tradition still exists. You were given a parliamentary system, and that tradition still exists. It's been abused, it's been straightened and foreclosed a bit, but it is still there. All of these tools exist to be used. The district government system is widespread. It is for you to use. Uganda was given an educational system. There are fine universities. There's a well-educated component to the people. Use these strengths. They're there and they're sitting there waiting to be used. They can also be used politically. And so I would say, in closing, the rule of law is what we started with here. The rule of law is what must propel. Remember how Museveni came to power? He came to power through what? Guns.
The gun.
He said, I'm a liberal, getting rid of a dictator, but he came to power through a gun. Bobby Wine doesn't have a gun. The NUP does not have a gun. It is a political movement based on the right under the rule of law to be heard. And that is ultimately its strength. Now, we're sitting here peacefully and safely in Arlington next to Washington. Could we have this meeting in Uganda? We might right now. I don't know. We might be able to right now. One could try and see what happens. If you're unwilling to try, then you can't get freedom. Freedom can be taken from the point of a gun, like Museveni has done. But it's also easily lost by fear. So I would encourage people to leave here with the message that the strength in this movement is much stronger than Museveni and his government. And remember that when you think about it.
Thank you, Bruce, for that powerful speech. And I think we sometimes forget that the legal system is long. When you file a case, it takes time. So let's all be patient. The evidence is there, and we know we'll get to the promised land one day. Just one comment. If you have a question or comment, because we're only going to take 3 questions going forward. So if you do have a question, please write it down, provide your email. We'll collect it and give it to the specific speaker, and they will get back to you. So we want to go through the program fast today. But
I want to ask a question for the general public.
I'll come and talk to you, mister. So, right now, I would like to invite the Madam Vice President of the Diaspora here in the US, Madam Leila from Boston. People power.
Our power.
Our power.
People power.
NUP.
Everywhere.
Everywhere.
NUP.
Thank you so much.
Mr. Bruce, thank you so much for that very insightful presentation about ICC. Mr. President, we welcome you, our honorable members of parliament, all the presenters around, and all the members in the house. My name is Leila Mutasa, and I am the Vice Team Leader, USA Chapter. And thank you all for coming around today. We really had that important message about the ICC. Personally, I feel re-energized. I hope you are all. Yes, I know we have not yet reached where we want to be, but we have made a very big progress. Very big process, exactly. Progress is there, and you can see light at the end of the tunnel. We thank you so much. I would like to introduce to you our next presenter, and that's Ms. Kim Paul. She's going to talk about culture as the new currency, empowering minds, decolonizing education, and diaspora as valuable allies in upward mobility and reconciliation of Uganda. Ms. Kim Paul is a visionary leader in social transformation through art. As the chief visionary of the Artisan Conference Philosophy under the Teaching Artists Institute, she spearheads efforts to connect sustainable development with art culture in emerging economies. With a strong international presence, Kim and her team of teaching artists operate in the USA, Ghana, Liberia, Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, and the Gambia, working on the art for social transformation, teaching artistry in action, curriculum, and workbook. Please help me welcome Ms. Kim Paul.
I was born by the river in a little tent, and oh, just like that river I've been running ever since. It's been a long time coming, but I know a change is gonna come. Oh, yes it is. It's been too hard living, but I'm afraid to die. I don't know what's up there on the skies. It's been a long time coming, but I know a change is gonna come. Oh, yes it is. So I go to my brothers and my sisters, yeah, and I say, brother, help me please. But they winds up knocking me back down on my knees. Oh, it's been a long time coming, but I know a change is gonna come. Yes. Oh, yes, please. Clap for yourself. You are a part of the change I think about. You are that permit. I start with music because it's important that we remember the vibration that is life, that African people wield. We are the cultural currency. When our organization, the Teaching Artists Institute, says that culture is the new currency, I'm talking about our culture. We are the rhythm people. And when we meet today in this room, we're not just talking about Uganda. At this time, I want to invite my panelists Just stand beside me. Forget the high table and the importance of sitting down. Stand beside me. Stand in unity, stand in power. We have Christopher and Doc from Cote d'Ivoire. We also have Alex Nago from Sierra Leone. Stand with me. You see, it's important that you remember that we're not talking about Uganda. We're talking about Africa for Africans at home and abroad. We're talking about Bia in Cameroon. We're talking about the transition from one generation to the next. I want you to remember what our predecessors were dealing with imperialism and colonization and the remnants of that. You know, when I listened to Museveni's speeches early on, he sounded a lot like Bobby Wine. But power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. So when I hear somebody like Bobby Wine, an artist after my own heart, talk about the importance of people power, it is you that we're referring to. But I need you to remember your identity. Because if we get in power, and you will win, you will get in power. Nobody lives forever. You will win. The question is, when it's your turn at the mantle, what will you create? Ideation, design thinking. How are you going to make space to bring artists to decision-making tables? How are you going to decolonize education? Because taking Museveni's power is not enough if you duplicate the same systems that put him into leadership.
Yeah.
The truth is that the Western powers benefit from the underdevelopment of Africa. I am not just talking about the work in Uganda. We are interconnected. I was in Mozambique and I saw the Portuguese language spoke so proudly. And me as a black woman, English is the only language I speak, so I'm proud to say Uganda Wangi. Right? Because I'm learning slowly. And as I convince my brothers and sisters in the diaspora that we need to go home to Africa, I need you to stand up and make sure that we're creating the Africa we want now. Because I know that you'll win. I know you will assume leadership. But if my brothers and sisters are coming back to Uganda to celebrate Catholicism, if they're coming back to Uganda to celebrate the democratic systems that were given to you, what is the rule of leadership that we've designed? How do we develop economies based on African-centered values, barter, and trade? What is the Baganda's kingdom? Where are the clans? How can we empower the chieftaincy? What is it that we're going to do to decide the cultural value of Uganda? Because you are in leadership, it's bigger than Bobby Wine. He is the beginning of a movement across the continent, and the young people are looking to you for leadership. They're looking to you for leadership, and we have an identity crisis. We are trying to decide who we are. Black skin, white mask. The question becomes, what is the cultural relevance of Uganda for the next generation? And how will that influence Africans everywhere? Culture is the new currency. And us in the diaspora, we are in support of you. We want to be a part of your movement. When we show up to your stores, we want to know, are you going to give us citizenship? Are you going to welcome us as valuable assets to the redevelopment of Africa? We are artists and creators, all of us. And at the next generation, we're talking about reconciliation. Because after Museveni is gone, we'll be left with our broken societies if we don't use art as a tool to figure out the healing now.
Yes.
How are we going to heal after this? I'm here because I'm on the winning team. You will win.
Yes.
But what next? What next? Black people all over the world are suffering from an internal sickness. It grows inside of us. How are we going to heal from that? I'm here as an artist giving you what we have. I heard the speaker before me say that it was the stability of the enslaved African that perpetuated the enslavement of African people and U.S. soil. Let me tell you, we never stopped fighting. We fought until we were free. There were slave
directions, but we are the rhythm people. Our songs were our source of disagreement. The Negro spirituals maintained our sanity. Hip-hop, this is the 50th year of hip-hop. We used our music to speak back to this system. How is Uganda's artist class going to come to the front of this movement and use their paintbrushes? How are they going to use their dances, their music? This is your power, the power to create and define reality. So I look forward to having our artists in Uganda, in Rwanda, in Tanzania. We work in these countries on the ground. We'll be in Uganda next July having this conversation. He said, are you ready to have this conversation on Ugandan soil? Guess what? Your African brothers and sisters in the diaspora already have a date on the calendar. We'll be there next July 2024 to have this conversation. We are not afraid. It's not about fear. We liberated our people here and we'll help to do it there. But guess what? We understand what comes with that liberation. Our people will be broken at the end of this fight when the Europeans and the ICC look and say, I told you so. Look at what the Africans are doing again. Look at the abuse. Look at the torture camps. We are the ones that will be left to pick up the broken pieces. And so I beg of you now, do not allow emotion to cloud how you work with our young people and babies. They are broken. They are afraid. And they're looking to you for leadership. Use art. Sing them mamas a lullaby. Mamas, we need you to come to the front. I'm talking now to the women. You are the first creator. In your womb, you will find the tenets of all creation, Black woman. You are an artist. Your uterus is the first creation. I need you to sing a lullaby to the young people. I need you to remind them of their identities. I need you to help them heal through the process that we're dealing with and prepare them for what's next. I'm joined by brothers and sisters from Cote d'Ivoire and Sierra Leone because they are also using their art as a tool to heal their societies.
People power.
Our power.
People power.
Our power.
I call myself a comrade because we all belong to the same struggle. Imagine for a second, we have a sudden death of Mussolini. It's not by our revolution, it's not by our violence. Today, we are witnessing the sudden death of Mussolini. He's dead, right?
Yeah.
Okay, now, the big question is, can Uganda rise? We're here today because we believe in liberation. We're here because we believe that culture is a new currency. The fight we have is not about Mussolini, it's not about dictatorship. It's about the spirit of Mussolini. And that spirit has become the African spirit in all African nations. It's about corruption, it's about self. It's about neglecting our people, it's about dividing ourselves. It's about using our resources meant for the greater good for ourselves and oppressing our people. That is the spirit we need to fight. And we cannot fight that spirit, but we need to replace that spirit with what I call the new African liberation movement. Culture is a new currency. What do we believe in? Who are we? What are our values? What are our principles? The culture of Museveni goes beyond his 37-year rule in Uganda. He became president when I was 4 years old. Amazing, right? Crazy. But every story you hear in Uganda with a 77-year-old dictator, you can get that same story in Sierra Leone, and we don't have anyone who's been president for even 15 years. And it goes beyond dictatorship. We're fighting a culture. That's the culture of Museveni. His influence on the continent, his principles, his values have been a seed of bad leadership on our continent. We need to rise as Africans, and we need to replace that culture with the bottom line culture. That's the culture of hope. It is not about bottom line as a person, but it's about the culture of standing up. It's about the culture of saying that I have to give it up all
to fight for what is right. It's about a culture that I have to stand for what is right when no one is watching. It's about a culture of unity. It's about a culture of believing in Uganda, believing in an African. It's about a culture of hope. It's about a culture of ensuring that Ugandans can live in Uganda and fulfill their potentials. That is the culture we need. We say culture is the new currency. So we are not fighting, we are not here to say we are fighting Mussolini, that we want to fight him with the guns. But yes, if he came by the guns, he came and fought by the guns. But let me tell you this. In our generation, our gun is different. We're living in the AI generation. Culture is a currency. Our culture is our bullet, is our weapon. We are going to use to liberate our nation, Uganda. I call it our nation because I'm an African. And I believe that every African shares the Ugandan story. We say culture is a new currency. That is what we need to be. That is what we need to do. We are using this culture not only to fight and defeat Mussolini, but we want to use this culture to buy him out. We want to use this culture to defeat him. We want to use this culture to bring down the long stance of dictatorship, because we believe that it has affected our continent a lot. Again, we ask, what are we using? It's about the emotions. For 37 years, don't we have brave, intelligent, and strong men from Uganda? For 37 years, we've had people in different forms and shapes coming like Bobby Wine, right? For 37 years. But this is it. It's a marathon and not a sprint. We need to endure. And we need to often tell ourselves that if we have to take the spirit and start with self, we need a personal approach to ensure that we win, and we need a personal approach. Our leader, our president, Bobby Wine, is seated here today because he took a personal journey. So you want to ask yourself for a moment, why are you part of the National Unity Platform? Are you part of this platform because you want to follow Bobby Wine? Are you part of this platform because you only believe in his leadership? What is a pain to you? Are you part of this platform because you think that enough should be enough?
Yes.
Are you part of this platform today? If the day I wake up tomorrow and Bobby Wine says that I'm no longer going to lead this movement, we are going to continue with this fight. It's truly possible. That is the spirit we need. Because the more we have that individual spirit and we come together as a collective, that is how we win. Culture is the new currency. It's powerful. What stories are we telling our kids? What are we teaching them? What art are we using to build our communities? How are we using this art to ensure that we come together as a community? How do we develop ourselves? Do we care about ourselves? Do we love ourselves? A house divided cannot stand. How united are we in our unity of the National Unity Platform? How united are we? Are we interested in getting out Mussolini because we want to be the next generation of corrupt African leaders? No. Is that our intent? No. We have to keep asking ourselves now and then. But we need to be intentional. And we need to be resolute. We need to be radical in our approaches to ensuring that we build a generation of people who are fearless. But not only people who are fearless, but people who are determined to win. People who are determined to succeed. And with culture as a currency, we can and we will buy out Mussolini. Thank you.
Amen.
Anyama, no rain, no weeper. For all the friends you all what they want. For all the friends you all what they want. La fille sous. Oh, what they want. Oh, my, oh, my, oh, my, the voices you oh, what they want. Oh, my, the voices you oh, what they want. Las filias, oh, what they want, oh, my, another mama. The title of this song is Our Dewa. It is in my language tribe, which is Bauli. I am D'Africa and I am from Côte d'Ivoire, the most hospitable country in the world. So I am a teacher and I'm also a singer. I have noticed that my students were not motivated about learning English. So I decided to use my artistry, which is music, to teach my students. And I've conducted this research work, and I saw that it worked. It worked. They started loving English. They started liking this language. And I also use music to promote peace and non-violence in my community. So you can understand that music or art plays a very significant role in the building of the community. I am a Mandela Washington Fellow. And as part of my professional development experience, I am working with the Teaching Artists Institute. At the Teaching Artists Institute, I am learning and understanding about the importance of African arts and also the preservation of languages that are just disappearing in Africa. So I am working now on the project, which is 2 books. Me and Kim, we are working on this project. It's a book for students from elementary school. These books will be written in 4 languages: Baule, which is the language of my tribe, Côte d'Ivoire, also English, and also Swahili, Luganda, and because I'm also Ghanaian, I speak French, I speak English, I speak my mother tongue. So this book will also be written in French for our students, for our children. So I take this opportunity to invite you on an event, a community event that will take place on the 27th of August. I will be performing this song that you just heard, Our Dewa, and I will also cook a special meal for my country, which we call sauce jublé with futu. This is pounded banana or pounded yam with okra, dried okra soup. So you are all invited because this day will be the release of the 2 books and the day where I will perform this song, Our Dewa, which means Here We Save You. So thank you for having me here today. I'm learning a lot here in the United States during this program with the Teaching Artists Institute. Thank you again.
So the reason that I invited Pressica to be here with us today is because it's important to know that we're still living our real lives as we go on this journey towards liberation. And language is so important. Are you writing this story? Even this story. We were so inspired when we saw that there was a documentary about the man and his music. That is the culture. But each one of you are part of this movement. Are you writing your story right now, today? The fact that you were in this room, in Uganda or in English, in Retiga. What are the languages of Uganda? These are the tools of your liberation. Take a stand and say that we will define us for us. The U.S. is not going to save you. The West is not going to save you. The ICC is not going to save you. Culture is the new currency, and through our culture, we will save ourselves. Thank you again. My name is Kim Pruitt.
powerful discussion. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for loving Uganda. Thank you so much for loving Africa. Thank you for loving the blackness in us. And thank you so much for the unity. And at this moment, you all had women. I think when we watched the movie yesterday, we saw the passion that Mrs. Chagulanyi had. Women, let's get up. We should be part of the movement. We should be scared. She did her job. We should all do our jobs. And at this moment, I would like to introduce Mr. Kareem to come and give us a brief history of where we're going to be talking.
Thank you. My name is Kareem Tami, and our next topic is going to be diaspora as effective advocates, shaping the US-African relations and policies towards Africa. And our presenter is going to be Mr. Melvin Ford. Melvin is a founder and president of the Constituency of Africa. He is also a board member of the African Society. Mr. Melvin has worked so hard when it comes to the US African policy. He's one of the people, the activists of the AGOA, the African Growth Opportunity